Good evening and welcome to Unfiltered. I'm Alderin Simpier. High alcohol consumption back on the spotlight. This after the Enyobeni Tavern tragedy in the Eastern Cape 3 weeks ago and the shooting at taverns in Gauteng as well as KwaZulu-Natal last weekend. Tonight we are discussing whether stricter alcohol regulations should be implemented in the country. To help us unpack this conversation, I'm joined in studio by Maurice Smithers, who is from the Southern African Alcohol Policy Alliance in South Africa, and also Lakin Timani, who is from the National Liquor Traders. Good evening, gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Good evening. Thank you.
And to our viewers, just a reminder that we are running a poll on our Twitter handle at Unfiltered SABC, and the question that we're asking you this evening is, should stricter alcohol regulations be introduced by government? Please go on to the poll. As you can see there, the poll question: should government introduce more alcohol restrictions? We have a yes or no segment there that you can click on. 43% so far saying yes, and 46.9% saying no. Please participate in the poll and also give us some of the reasons why you believe there should be stricter alcohol regulations or not. Lucky, what do you think about this question? Yes or no to that question?
Look, I think for us, the answer is both yes and no.
Okay.
Because we need to be very specific in terms of what regulations are we talking about, because not all regulations are bad. I mean, some of the regulations might actually mean that, liquor traders are held to account in terms of their license conditions, and they're also able to adhere to the conditions of their licensing. I mean, most of the issues that we have discovered in the past few months, I think the lockdown was also a perfect opportunity to see how committed the liquor traders were in terms of ensuring that they sell alcohol in a responsible way. And we saw that most of them, in some instances, were actually not adhering to the license conditions. So the restrictions that we saw during lockdowns meant that liquor traders had to protect their license in how they conduct themselves, in how they behave. And we know that in the Western Cape, for example, where a lot of law enforcement was active on the ground, most people had their license suspended. So we know that some regulations will need to be tightened up so that we can have an environment where alcohol could be enjoyed responsibly. And if we are not able to be bold enough and accept that we might have to face certain restrictions, and then I think we are in the wrong industry.
What sort of restrictions?
So if you look at the issue of trading hours, most liquor traders do not want to trade till 4 a.m. or 2 a.m. They're more than willing to cap those trading hours to look at 12 a.m. because liquor traders, especially taverns, cannot be separated from township. They're part of the ecosystem. And if you are running a tavern that operates till 2 a.m. and you are right in the middle of a township where you've got neighbors on your left and your right, and opposite you cannot really be operating, up to 2 a.m. I mean, you've got kids that have to study.
But some do.
No, some do. Hence we're having this conversation to say that we need to look into that. Does it help the country that we have taverns that can operate till 2 a.m.? Does it make any sense? Does it inspire confidence as a country that has seen what the dangers of alcohol could be?
Okay. And Maurice, your take on that question?
Yeah, look, we don't have a yes or no answer. We definitely say there should be more restrictions, but we caution that just having restrictions is not going to be enough, because we need to look at some of the drivers of excessive alcohol consumption in the country. And many of those are social issues, they're economic issues that have to be addressed. And we also need to look at enforcement and corruption, because we know that a lot of laws, there are laws already in place. Enyobeni is a good example. There is a law currently that says you can't drink if you're under 18, and you shouldn't be let into a tavern if you're under 18, and yet kids down to the age of 13 were let into the tavern there. So if you don't have enforcement of the restrictions, and also if you have police and other officials that are corrupt, well, then you're not going to win.
I want to touch on the restrictions, but just for now, and then we'll go back to the social issues. So when it comes to the restrictions, what sort of restrictions do you think should be introduced? What is it about the current restrictions and legislation that we have in place that is not tight enough?
Okay, well, let me just explain that we have a Liquor Act, a National Liquor Act of 2003. And government itself has recognized that Liquor Act is not adequate, which is why in 2016, Cabinet approved a new national liquor policy. And that liquor policy is based on the World Health Organization global strategy to reduce alcohol-related harm. And that rests on 3 basic pillars. The one is that you've got to severely limit or ban alcohol advertising, because advertising normalizes, glamorizes the drinking of alcohol and creates the kind of challenge that we saw at Enyobeni. The second thing is you've got to reduce availability. And you do that through perhaps reducing the number of liquor outlets. You do it by, as Lucky was suggesting, reducing operating hours. You do that by increasing the age of drinking. So there's a variety of ways in which you can reduce availability. And the third way is to increase the cost of alcohol. And you do that through increased excise tax or minimum unit pricing, limiting container sizes because the larger your container size, the cheaper the alcohol is per litre. So if you do those and you back those up with good law enforcement and addressing all the other issues,
Lucky, what do you say to some of those suggestions?
Look, I think Maurice rightly said that there are social issues that give rise to how alcohol is consumed in the country. So if you're going to introduce the issue of increase in price or taxation, for example, then it means we are subsidizing government's incompetence in dealing with some of the social issues that give rise to how alcohol is consumed in the country. So we certainly do not accept that that is the way to go. But also, if you look at, so you mentioned, just remind me the second one.
There was the increase in the age, reduce availability, ban on alcohol advertising, and increase the cost of alcohol.
So if we look at Enyobeni, which is a wake-up call for us as liquor traders, a 13-year-old should not have been in a tavern. But you found that 13-year-old there because the outlet owner failed to take responsibility and reasonable care of the license conditions. So let us first address the issue that we have. We have 13, 14
So you're saying
olds.
no to increasing the age limit?
No, what if you increase the age limit from 18 to 21, all you're doing, you're increasing a non-compliance pool from between the age of 18 to 21. But you're also saying that, for example, if you go to tertiary, you can do your first and second year whilst drinking oros and then only drink alcohol on your third year or honors level. It doesn't make sense. You can get married at 18, you can sign contract at 18, yet you can't drink alcohol. So you are entrusted to do certain things in the country, and yet you're not entrusted to consume alcohol. So we feel that that's a non-starter. But let me come to the other one, the issue of advertising. Why ban advertising? If we could push that, for example, liquor manufacturers focus on highlighting the dangers of alcohol in the advertising. So a lot can be done, but if you're saying you're going to restrict advertising of alcohol, what about the jobs that are dependent on that space? So
okay, let's have that conversation when we come back. Speaking about the advertising of alcohol, of course, we also have legislation in place that already speaks about the control of advertising alcohol and how that advertising should go and make sure that you don't sell to young children. However, though, children look at some of those advertising and they're like, this looks quite appealing, and they want to explore. So what should happen with regards to that? Is cancelling or banning advertising, alcohol advertising, the route to go, and one of the solutions that the country should be exploring? That's the conversation that we're having when we come back. Welcome back as we have a conversation looking at ways of exploring how to reduce harmful alcohol consumption in the country. Joined this evening by Maurice Smithers, who is from the Southern African Alcohol Policy Alliance in South Africa, and also Lucky Ntimane, who is from the National Liquor Traders. So Maurice, the question around advertising, and I want to peg that against cigarettes, for instance, because that was also introduced and there was a pushback against that. But has that assisted?
Look, there are people still smoking, and I don't think that the intention of banning advertising and having tobacco regulations was to stop people smoking. It was to actually reduce the level of smoking in the country, but also it was to create safe smoking, if you want to call it that way. So actually what happened as a result of that legislation was that what we call the balance of power between smokers and non-smokers changed completely, because before that legislation, if you were a non-smoker, it was very difficult to get somebody who smoked to actually take your needs seriously. That is completely shifted. And in many ways, that's all we're trying to achieve now. We're not trying to say people mustn't drink. We are trying to say that people must drink safely. And when we say safely, safely for themselves, but more importantly, safely for the people around them. That's all we want to achieve. And if the legislation can do that, then it must happen.
Okay.
Because currently it's not happening.
So one of the other things that legislation also did is that it also spoke about geography, for instance, where you can smoke, right?
Correct.
Within a building or even outside sometimes.
Correct.
But there is a designated place to do that. The conversation that's happening now as well when it comes to the to the establishment of taverns and the proximity of how close those taverns are within of each other is that needs to be something that's looked into as well. Is this something that you say we should be exploring?
Definitely, definitely. I mean, I think, you know, the question that we raised earlier on in relation to the location of taverns, first of all, is how many there are. And should we actually be having what's called a quota system, where you say that you can only have so many taverns in a particular area depending on the population of that area. And this is done in parts of the world. The other thing is, where are they located? One of the big challenges we have around alcohol in South Africa is that so many of taverns and shebeens are located in residential areas with very, very negative consequences for ordinary family life. So that needs to be done as well. And then the question is, what kind of outlets do you have? You know, do you have, and if you have them in a business area, what are the operating hours? So I think there's a lot of ways in which you can work with what we have right now and just tweak the system so that it actually becomes safer for everyone.
Lucky, your take on that? The Social Development Minister earlier on this afternoon during an ANC press briefing also said that this is something that they are exploring.
We actually have a problem with the notion that taverns are a problem, because, you know, it creates an impression that black people do not know how to drink alcohol or they don't even know how to run these establishments. When we talk about the distance between a church or a school, we should not restrict it to taverns. If you look at Tembisa, for example, they've got 8 shopping centers. Each and every shopping center has about 3 to 4 retailers that operate there. And those shopping centers are also next to schools. So when we talk about the issue of alcohol, we need to look holistically at everyone who sells alcohol. And mind you, a taverner sells more expensive than a retailer. So who gives access to alcohol in the township? It's actually not a taverner, but it is a retailer. Because a tavern, by its very nature, it's a social space where people go to have conversation and engage. But in a retailer, you are able to just go by, and retailers run specials. Taverns do not run specials. So the issue of availability of alcohol should not be restricted to taverns. I think it's an unfair thing for us
How
to
far do you think it should go? Let me put it this way. Is it a yes to restrictions in terms of proximity?
Yes, I think.
So you agree with Maurice that let's explore having a quota that uses a per capita formula?
Yeah, but I want to clarify that the issue here, the conversation is not about taverns.
Yeah.
It's about traders of liquor in a township space, which include retailers.
Why are you shaking your head?
But also, let me finish, Maurice.
No, because the point is we are saying, as SAPA, it's every alcohol. We're not focusing on taverns. We're not focusing on taverns. We are talking about liquor outlets, whether they are off consumption or on consumption, and wherever they're located. I live in a middle class suburb in Johannesburg. There are problems with the liquor outlets in that area, restaurants.
Yeah.
There are problems with guest houses. There are, just recently, I think earlier this year, a youngster was stabbed to death outside a nightclub in Sandton. These problems we're not talking about townships, Lucky. We're not talking about
Lucky,
taverns.
your response to that?
No, maybe clarified, but I just want to give you an example. At the waterfront in Cape Town, there are more liquor licenses than in all the Cape Metropolitan townships combined. Guguletu, Khayelitsha, Langa, Philippi have less license than one shopping mall. So if we are talking about reducing these liquor establishments, then waterfront, for example, should be the first one to focus on.
Absolutely.
But isn't the difference here that when we speak about the waterfront, we're speaking about a place that has been cordoned off and zoned as a business district compared to a residential area where you'd mostly found taverns?
You are making a very valid point.
Yeah.
townships were not created to be economic zones. They were created to be pool for labor so that the regime could then access that labor.
Yeah.
Now, black people have made something out of themselves, created business opportunities to support their families. And we are seeing this issue more in the Western Cape than in any other province, where we are being restricted from accessing license on a basis of zoning. So the leadership in that Republic of Western Cape seems to fail to understand that the issue of zoning cannot be used to restrict the availability of licenses that should be rightfully awarded to those that are deserving to get liquor licenses. So we fully understand that we were not meant as townships to be a zone for business. And guess what? These big retailers are now getting into our space because now they found a shortcut of getting into our space. It takes, on average, 2 years for a tavern to get a license. But these big retailers, the minute the shopping center is done, they already have a license. So it can take them even a month to get a liquor license. But those are some of the issues that we're ventilating with relevant authorities.
Okay, well, legislation is one part of this conversation, but there's also the social conversation that we need to have. And that's a social conversation that says social ills versus job creation at the same time. How do you balance the two? And welcome back. The final segment of the conversation looking into whether we should be introducing stricter legislation to deal with alcohol consumption and also, of course, the unhealthy alcohol consumption. So the poll that we have up is the question, should government introduce more alcohol restrictions? And the options there being yes and no, and the yes in the lead at 53.6% and 46.4% saying no, and this is out of 151 votes. Maurice, do these results surprise you at all?
Not really, although I would have thought that the yeses would have been higher, given the fact that only about a third of people aged 15 and above in South Africa actually drink. So
what do these results tell you?
Well,
at least from the people that we've polled.
I guess it tells us that more people do want restrictions. I don't know what the audience is. I don't know who's watching. But I would have thought it would be slightly higher. But.
Okay. Lucky?
Look, I think people in South Africa really do want to see restrictions, but within reason. And we believe that maybe some of our customers could have voted if it wasn't for load shedding. So, and then
I think Maurice could make the same argument. But just quickly in conclusion, is this conversation about the social ills? And we know and we've seen that we've made an example of Enyo Beni, 13-year-old, one of the people who died out of the 21 who died. So there's the social conversation, but there's also the aspect that Lucky raised a bit earlier on, and that is around job creation. So how do we balance the two, Maurice?
Look, it's always going to be a challenge, and that challenge happened with the tobacco restrictions as well, because exactly the same arguments were raised at that time. But the reality is that if government has a duty of care in society, and it's known globally that alcohol is a problem. Just a recent study actually by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that came out in the last couple of days in the Lancet magazine said that actually there's no health or social benefit to people below, I can't remember the exact age, but I think it's below the age of 40, drinking at all. And that there's minimal benefits of drinking alcohol above that age. So we have to look at it from that point of view. The challenge we have in South Africa is that the responsibility for liquor legislation, national liquor legislation, and in provinces is located in economic departments. And so while they have a responsibility for that balance, their orientation is always towards the economic. So we actually are proposing that the social and health aspects should be removed from the DTRC and the economic development departments and put into the either health or social development. And then DTRC and economic development could just focus on the economic aspects.
Lucky?
First, that study by Belinda and
Bill Gates.
Yeah, we don't recognize that. Those guys have never done anything for the townships of South Africa, especially liquor traders, and also coming to government, which failed to support liquor traders during the height of lockdown. So we feel that the proper conversation could be had with people that are interested, but as far as it goes, our government is not interested in uplifting taverns, in uplifting liquor traders in the township space, and we've seen that. We've got evidence to support, to back up that claim that we're making. The economic realities of what taverns offer, the township economy, could not be ignored. Out of the 39,000 licensed taverns that we have as a country, we have about 250,000 jobs that are supported in that space. But I want to make a very important point. The selling of alcohol should not compromise the health of our people, and it should not be done to put profits ahead of the livelihoods of those that not only are dependent on the alcohol industry, but the township space. Because you cannot remove a tavern and the township. It's part of the same ecosystem. If you get a tavern that is not trading in compliance with the laws, it affects the entire community. So we are saying that any tavern that operates in that space of non-compliance should be removed. It has no right to operate. But we're also making a firm statement to say the law enforcement officials need to clamp down very hard on shebeens, because most of the availability of alcohol in the township space come from the unlicensed market. Yeah,
for me, the enforcement and the legislative element is one part of it, but there's also the part around the binge drinking, for instance, and that for me is a problem. And how do we address that particular question? Even if you have a conversation about gun control in the US, sure, you have legislation that allows somebody to walk into a store and buy a gun, but there's something about the psyche of the person that says, I actually want to go and buy a gun and I'm going to go shoot. So how do we address that element around the binge drinking?
The binge drinking is a problem in our country, and this is something that we've managed to sweep under the carpet for a long time. You might have read about the incident in Limpopo, where a guy downed the bottle.
Yes.
You know, we have normalized that. You know, when guys talk in the morning, you know, after a weekend, you know, they talk about how many bottles they finished the previous 2 days or previous night. You know, it gives us that macho, it gives us that ego that we crave as men, even as women as well, to say we can drink this much alcohol. That is something that we need to speak against. And also liquor traders have got a duty to not serve alcohol to anyone who's visibly intoxicated.
How, really?
Yes, that's a duty. It's there on the license conditions.
So when a liquor trader actually does sell to somebody that they can see is visibly way over even knowing what their name are,
they are being non-compliant if they do that. And those traders should not be allowed to trade in alcohol. The responsibility and duty of care that rests on a liquor trader is so huge. That's why the issuing of licenses should not be done willy-nilly.
Maurice?
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. And but I think the issue of binge drinking is it is to do with cost, because you know the cheaper the booze is, the easier it is to drink more. But again, it goes back to what are the drivers that get people to do that, and they are complex. They are the advertising, the normalization, the glamorization. They are the other social aspects, economic pressures, stress, and so on. That's why we argue that, and we are arguing this right now with Cabinet. I'm actually in the process of writing a letter to every single minister in the Cabinet to say that it is a whole of government responsibility. They cannot leave it to the DTIC to decide what legislation is needed, because so many different departments are affected. And also, the consequences of a new legislation will have an impact. I mean, this issue about the number of taverns, we think that where government has failed is to actually assist, like he's talking about how townships were traditionally a labor pool for white business. Have we done enough in our society to actually help people to transition from selling alcohol, which is something they did as an act of resistance almost under apartheid, to transition from selling alcohol to engaging in other businesses, which they were not allowed to do under apartheid? That's a huge issue that government has to address.
And this, of course, is no new conversation, because remember the beer hall riots as well back in apartheid. But thank you so much for your time, Maurice, as well as Lucky. Thank you for choosing us this evening, Unfiltered. I'm back again next week, Monday, same time, same place, right here on S3. That's it.